So the final panel will be about 20 minutes or so. I want to invite the panelists for the third group. I'm looking for the remote.
Where is it?
Oh, here it is.
Excellent.
Forward.
Okay, we had
Forward.
that.
One more.
We had that. Okay, so panel 3. This is next steps for the Fulbright Arctic Initiative, but also just a reflection on what we've heard today, a reflection on the last 18 months, and insight and perhaps teasing out some future themes for the Fulbright 3 as well. These are not just part of a Fulbright discussion, but really meant to tease out important issues or themes or recommendations for the broader Arctic community. And as noted before, these frameworks and ideas are not just for Arctic communities. They can be replicated elsewhere. We've learned a great deal from models from elsewhere in the world. This is one way that we're thinking beyond the Arctic as well. So with that, we'll transition to the third panel. I've now transitioned from
Welcome back, Mike.
thanks for being here from the panel. Thank you. So in that transition, let me thank two colleagues in particular. Oftentimes we don't take people for granted, but we forget. And so there are two individuals that have helped me a great deal from the beginning of all of this, and that's Jack Durkee. And is Jack still in here? Jack is to my, of course he is, right? Well, they're right on cue, Jack. Jack isn't just the guy who brings you water. Jack is the guy that helped me create and now run this Polar Institute. And as always, Jack, thank you for the help and guidance and the support. And Bethany Johnson, who you've seen now. Bethany, like almost on cue on my right. Bethany, thank you so much. Bethany works with us in the Polar Institute. And if it wasn't for Jack and Bethany and others, there would be no institute here, and certainly not the forum for us to do our work. So thank you both for helping me these last 2 years, Jack, and Bethany for jumping in just a few months ago and helping out there. So Ross and I have the honor of working with our colleagues here on this third panel. This will be a little shoot from the hip, but it also be purposeful shooting from the hip. We had a number of titles for this session. We landed on Next Steps, Policy-Relevant Research Priorities for an Expanding Fulbright Arctic Network. Boy, if academics didn't write that, I don't know who did. But it dawned on Ross and I, perhaps a couple of days ago, we should ask this question. So what? So what? We've had 2 Fulbrights now, and they've done good work. But has it been impactful? We think it has, but we'd like the perspective from this panel. I think through this Fulbright, and it is quite a different model as you have seen. It's been powerful in some ways. We've probably fallen short in some other ways. But thinking of the Fulbright, I think of other activities going on. And Gwen, be prepared because I'm coming to you with the first so what, okay? I think through this Fulbright in the following ways. Not just amassing incredible intellect and dedication with these scholars. By the way, 16 of the most brilliant scholars among hundreds who would have wanted to be sitting right here. So this is a special group, and we thank them very much. But I think through this Fulbright in a number of ways. This is sort of a rift. I think about the Arctic Council and the connection between perhaps us and the Arctic Council, the Arctic Economic Council, the Arctic Coast Guard format, the binding agreements that have come out over the last few years in these different international fora. I think about Arctic Frontiers in Tromsø and our colleagues there and the work that they're doing. Arctic Circle Assembly and the work that President Grimson and his team do. Arctic Encounters, Rachel Callander and her work out of Seattle. The work we do here in D.C., the work that Ross does at the Institute of Arctic Studies. I think about the Arctic Domain Awareness in Alaska doing work there. So it's a so what in terms of the work we've done, but where do we fit? Do we fit? And is this yet another link to this growing group who do work every day, community-wise, local, regional, international, nationally? So 2 questions here. One is the so what. The second is perhaps where we fit. Where does Fulbright fit in this growing group of people dedicated to the Arctic? Gwen, just a couple of easy questions for you to perhaps respond to.
Thank you, Mike. I'll start by introducing myself. Gwen Healy Akiaro yunga, ikalomitaw yunga isumurtui yunga kawigarti nunavumi. My name is Gwen Healy Akiago, and I come from Iqaluit in Nunavut, and I am the executive and scientific director of the Qawi Geltit Health Research Center, which is a community-led, independent community research center in Nunavut, and so I wanted to, I guess, why we care and why anybody else should care is, well, I feel very, very special in that our whole journey together in this Fulbright cohort started in my hometown in Iqaluit in May of 2018. And so it was a very special moment for me to share our life, the community where I was born and raised, and I continue to live and raise my family. And people could see our connections to our lands, our connections to each other, and our terrible telecommunications. Nobody could get their internet to work, and the emails, and that's our daily life. And so the journey began there, and then we set up our processes for how we were going to work together, and that really grounded us in communities, in my community, and in everyone's communities as we move forward on our journey over 18 months to here in DC. And what Fulbright really did for us was help us to cultivate time and space to have these conversations about these complex issues, and not just issues, I suppose. I guess what was unique about our group was we didn't use an issue-based approach. We used a strengths-based approach. So some of the questions we had today or we've had over the last several months are, what do you think about suicide prevention, or what do you think about climate change? And through our strengths-based approach, that infiltrates everything. By not just focusing on issues, we're focusing on strengths. We're focusing on the capabilities of our communities and elevating those in the spaces we are now through the Fulbright. So we really had the luxury of doing that when I think in our daily work we're often in a reactive culture, and Fulbright really fostered that space for us, I think.
Hi, everybody. I guess I'll go next. My name is Elizabeth Rink, and I'm a professor of community health at Montana State University in Bozeman, Montana. And I'm also a fellow with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation in their interdisciplinary research leaders program. And I think listening or Mike's question around where does our particular Fulbright program fit in the larger context of the Arctic, it really is a gift and a blessing to be able to come together to co-produce our own science together through this very interdisciplinary process over an extended period of time. So if I think about where does the Fulbright Arctic Initiative fit in the larger context of Arctic science and Arctic policy, it's around this idea of co-production from beginning, middle to end. We were able to work through several challenging concepts together through a period of time. We also, in all our various ways, had exchanges in different countries, in different institutes, and that really allowed us the ability to look at different governance structures, different political systems, different ways of doing science. How I do my community-based participatory research is very different than like what I hear Ellie or Soy Lee talking about, and that informs my own science. So that cross-cultural exchange, not only between us and the institutes where we did our field work and our Fulbright exchanges, but also when we go back to our respective institutions and we mentor other faculty, or we mentor and work with the communities we work with at home, or even the students we work with. I mean, it really is this amazing flow of education and information. And the other piece that I think we model very well as a cohort is in the Arctic, and I would also say in Indigenous communities all over the world, relationships are the foundation of everything. And my science and my degrees and my expertise means nothing to the communities I work with in Greenland and Finland and also in Montana. And so understanding the importance of relationships and building relationships over time to actually make an impact is the other, I think, unique experience that we had as a cohort.
Thank you.
Yes, well, maybe I continue. Well, I think that this has been, the Fulbright has been able to create a powerful network. And this is the best thing of this whole program, that we learn to know each other during these 18 months and also work together. And actually, even if it was a very heterogenic group, it worked out. I mean, chemistry between us and everything, it was just perfect. So there is a lot to bring back to our home institutions, but I guess that we also continue working together, and probably not everybody together, but within smaller teams, and I think that it's going to reflect on this Arctic science and research and teaching. Teaching is also something that I'm definitely going to bring back to my own institute. And I learned a lot, especially from the guys of this Thriving Communities team. It was very much new information, and I'm really thankful for that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think earlier I mentioned differences in vocabularies and shared vocabularies and building an understanding of that. And I think just to follow up on that, what Soile just said, I have learned many new sort of words and phrases and ways of thinking from our other group. And I think putting words to maybe concepts that were vague in my mind or that I knew were important but didn't really have a good way of articulating is really important. So I just want to thank them for that and thank Fulbright for, like they said, making the space for that. I think stepping out of just discussing, the Fulbright program and what we've done, what Mike mentioned earlier, which is that in DC there's a number of things that everyone's thinking about and talking about right now with the Arctic, and actually not that many of those were discussed today on the stage, right? Security, militarization issues, shipping, all kinds of things, right, that I think a lot of people are talking about and thinking about. And so I just think also integrating the dialogues and the discussions and the vocabularies in that larger space is really important. That's really not trivial. And I think people have used the word time and space, in why it was such a privilege to be involved in the Fulbright program. And those aren't things that I think a lot of people in decision-making positions have, to take that time in that space. But I think it's very important. And so I think finding a way to integrate in a very real manner some of these concepts into daily, MOs, right, of how these discussions happen will be important. Yeah, and there were so many kind of questions that you laid out at the beginning. So I think also just in terms of maybe part of the so what and the what's next, we've also talked about the immediacy of some issues in the Arctic and about the rapid change. I mean, climate change in the north is wild. It's more or less out of control what's happening to communities because of changing climates and also demographic changes and changes in the economies and the economic development and all of this. And so I think really getting a sense of how do we take these concepts and get them into this discussion now is really important and I think critical. And so I'm very pleased to be here today and to be with such distinguished colleagues to talk about that. Hopefully people will have thoughts on that and take those ideas home with them and integrate it a little bit more into that daily immediacy that is DC.
Yeah, so let's pivot here a little bit. I think I wrote that long academic title that Mike didn't like very much. And so he reduced his segment to 2 words. And so that put me under the gun to do the same thing. So I first tried what's next. And I tried that out on some of the younger scholars in the program. And they said, no. It's play the experience forward. Okay, and it really, that's right. So I want to think about that. SAO Meredith Rubin announced the third round, right? So we're going to have a new group of Fulbright scholars in this program. And the first cohort helped you, and you're going to help that third cohort. And we're building this ever-expanding network of networks, which will have real impact on the Arctic. I think people that have been here today can already see what we can accomplish with a program like this and with a wonderful, diverse set of scholars that have formed really deep, long-lasting relationships. So maybe I'd ask you, is there some advice you might give to cohort 3? Some research topics that you really wanted to get to but couldn't, and you might want to cajole them or encourage them or somehow lead them into that pathway? What are some new methods that might be incorporated into that? Or maybe just talk about the ways in which you intend to be continue sharing your work with the public and with audiences and peoples of the North, and what you might counsel these new scholars about. How do they plan for that in their research? Lots of different things here, but what would you share with the third cohort if you just had a minute and a half with them? So I would start with Beth.
I would say be focused and have a lot of fun at the same time, because I think it's important to balance work and then also relaxation. Because as the head of the Fulbright board last night talked about, we travel long ways, we leave our families, our homes, and so it's important to take care of yourself and then also be focused and get a lot of work done. So I think after the work that's been done over the first 2 cohorts, something that's come out in our group is we have identified a lot of issues that need to be addressed and we have our wonderful recommendations in our policy brief. But where our group did not get to is how we're going to do this. So, for example, with ethics, there's been a lot of work on ethics and UNDRIP and IARPIC with NSF, and some countries in the Arctic have very clear developed ethical guidelines and ethical policies, and other countries in the Arctic do not. For example, Greenland, or when you look at some issues in Sweden, Finland, and Norway around ethics. So we didn't really get to the how, like how would you address ethical, how would you design ethical guidelines in these countries? How would you work with communities on ethics? I work in communities where they don't understand what ethics is, and if I give them an informed consent, they just look at me like, what is this, right? But I'm obligated to do that. So I have to think about, well, how am I going to meet the obligations of my institution, and how am I going to respect the ethics and human subjects with the people I work with? So I think the how is important. I also think an area that we feel is important to further address is looking at mixed methods and mixed methodologies for how you address many of these complex challenges in the Arctic, just using quantitative methods and indicators and very beautiful maps and thoughtful data collection that's very quantitative and measured does not contextualize the research for communities that we work in and live with, and it also only tells half of the story. So if you really want to tell a full story of what's going on with Arctic communities, you need to find innovative ways to tell that story, and that in research and science, that's our language is with mixed methods and finding different methodologies. I have more, but I think Gwen can probably can also probably
build on
chime in.
Okay.
She can build on, because we're at this point we're just symbiotic.
brain.
Yes, we're one brain.
Goes back
We're,
and
we're all
sense
one
that.
brain.
I think one area that we've talked quite a lot about is about making things actionable. So going beyond describing and looking to the next step, to what the actions will be. And I think Meredith Rubin in her keynote mentioned that as well, that there are calls from communities for decisive actions. And so in our mind and going forward, one of the topics that was raised in the last week or so was looking at ways to incorporate Indigenous knowledges and perspectives through a research spectrum or process from the identification of issues and questions all the way through to analysis and knowledge translation and sharing. And those models and frameworks already exist. So we're not talking about anything new in many cases, but finding those pathways, those actions that help elevate those existing processes to circles or spheres where where those processes are needed, and focusing on that co-creation piece. So moving into this, this next phase of doing more than describing, even though we know through monitoring and assessment describing is also still needed, but we're all hearing that voice that action is next. What is the next clear action, and what are the pathways look like to making that happen? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I had one more I realized that we had talked about. Are you done, or do you want to?
Yeah, go ahead, but quickly.
Okay.
Yes.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
I want to just talk amongst yourselves.
Yeah, I know. That's what we like to do. The other area that I think we also realized, and it wasn't until this week when we were working with our sustainable economies colleagues, was we never really got to looking at industry and how industry influences health, and what is that dynamic and that relationship between industry and community health, and how do you monitor that and hold industry accountable. So that was an area that I think is very focused, that we did not talk about, that we realized was also important.
Thank you, Beth and Gwen. Soily, would you like to contribute?
Yes. Actually, I can continue from what Beth said. Yes, this could be something that we could, continue working together. It's an interesting topic, but I would think I would answer more somehow on the practical level, that for the third cohort, it would be good if we could keep this this communication between the first, the second, the third, somehow that there should be more communication between us, because I realized at some point that we have been studying quite similar topics than the first cohort, but we were not so closely connected with them. And also maybe if the Arctic Council could be somehow drawn to this cooperation from the beginning, like these policymakers. It took us for a long time to somehow figure out how can we reach these policymakers and how to do it, because not all of us have worked with policymakers. I have worked with companies, but it's a bit different. So in a way, a bit more this kind of communication.
Those are excellent points. Thank you, Soily.
Oh, I would just, you had asked what topics, so I'll give you some that I've been thinking about. I think that I would just acknowledge this is mostly thinking in a sort of from a marine standpoint, as I am a marine biologist, and thinking a bit about international and high seas issues in the Central Arctic Ocean. And I think that institutions and governance gaps in the region is a really ripe area to think about. And I don't think it's just on that level I prefaced with. I've heard the word governance as well used a lot about how and how do we implement. And I think part of that is a capacity issue in terms of governance. And I know that's not a new idea. I know a lot of people are talking about what are the institutions in the region. And just thinking about the ambassador's remarks that started off our day, one of the key pillars of the Icelandic chairmanship being a stronger Arctic Council. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? And is that the space in which all of this has to happen, or are there other instruments and governance structures that are really needed? So I think that for me is something I will be thinking a lot about after this experience, and could be an interesting space to go for the third cohort.
Well, thank you. I guess some of the key points I'm picking up from this discussion and really your thoughts are, one is that maybe third round we should think about earlier and better connections with policymakers right from the beginning. We strive to do that, but I think for many of the scholars, this entry into the policy world is one of the most rewarding parts of this program. But it's not easy, and it takes time, and it takes really good mentors and people to guide one through that process. And so I think that would be a tremendous help to the program. This really is all about relationships, and the more that we can do to foster ongoing relationships from round 1, round 2, and then engage with round 3 is going to have career-long implications for the research directions of critical topics in the Arctic. So that's something that we'll be talking about certainly with the State Department and others as the next cohort is selected, but also the outline of the new program.
I was going to try to add to some of that, but I can't because because we've talked about these a number of times. This has been an evolution from an idea, a concept idea. The first cohort, second cohort, be forewarned that we will State Fulbright will lean on you for this next one. And I think as the governance issues in the Arctic have evolved, which governance structure, they were all being stressed, all of them, because no one predicted how fast everything would change. And so our norms today were not the norms yesterday, nor will they be tomorrow. And so no one knows what the Arctic Council will look like. But we would strongly advocate, and they are receptive to outside voices. I think what's happened here is Fulbright has become not a louder voice, but perhaps another voice that can amplify and tease out some issues that others are dealing with, but do it in a different way. Mm-hmm. So I think the governance structures, this point of legacy, which I'll park for a moment, is going to add into the real concrete themes that we have. And we're going to lean on all of you. Mm-hmm. and others to help the next Fulbright cohort, the next leads, work with the directors from each of the countries to shape this next Fulbright because, again, this will be shaped now, but boy, in 6 months, things could be so different in the Arctic, Ellie, as you've pointed out. It's so fast. So we're always in this feeling of catch-up. But I think we have a good base here, a good foundation to help plan this next one or be a part of the planning for the next one. Anything else? Okay. We're at a little after 4, so we're actually doing pretty good. We caught up somewhere. That's a good thing. Ross, do you want to do some closing remarks, and I'll do some closing remarks?
Sure. So, as you've learned, Mike and I have been working on this with a core group of people from the State Department and IIE for 6 years now. So it's hard to sort of provide closing remarks. This has been like the most amazing part of my academic experience, has been working with these two sets of scholars. I think we've had 24 across the two groups, 24 webinars and 6 international events covering the Arctic and interacting with so many different people. And that really is what Fulbright is about. It's about international exchange of scholars. And it's not just about our science and our outreach. It's really about relationships and meeting people and sharing our culture with others. And that truly is the value and the benefit and the lasting investment in a new Arctic, is through programs like this that provide time for the relationships, move us about, support us, and provide a mentoring background for all of us to do the best work that's possible. So in my mind, that's what I've taken away from this. It's changed the way that I teach, the way that I relate to my students, and I hope it's changed the way my colleagues at Dartmouth approach these issues about the Arctic. They come to me now and say, what's going on in the Arctic and where have you been? And half the time I'm talking about Fulbright and this symposium and this group and this new paper coming out. So these are really deep and lasting impacts certainly on my career and very personally. And I just want to thank all of you and everyone for this opportunity. And mostly I want to thank Mike. You were very generous in your comments about me, but we could I'm the academic guy sitting in a university, and Mike is here in Washington and just
Careful.
at this all the time. And he brings the policy perspective and the professionalism that we value so highly, and understanding how policy works. And I've learned a lot from that, but mostly, I think Beth mentioned, it's just been tremendous fun. And so I want to thank you, Mike, for all of that and all of the fun. And we have many, many projects that will continue together. So just like Fulbright, you're there forever. You're kind of, you are part of the alumni. We will continue to work. I'm a fellow here at the Wilson Center, so this will continue. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me then wrap it up so we can move on to the wonderful reception that's awaiting us out there. Thank all of you today for being with us. You've come because you're supportive of your colleagues, but also having the interest in the work that we do. And for everyone who has watched, and we're blessed here at Wilson to have a great team, we're able to project all over the world. So what we have said here today has rippled. It will be on our website. We're going to share that, obviously, website with IIE and the Fulbright program so that we can get the words that were mentioned here today out and into communities where they belong, and also for the broader Arctic community that's working not just in the Arctic, but elsewhere around the world. Ross and I want to thank a few people, so bear with me for just a couple more minutes. Each of these programs is labor intensive, but they're labors of love. And so even though people say, don't worry, it's not a problem, it's a problem. And when you ask somebody, do you have the time, they say yes, and they don't. And so, but there's just an incredible group behind us all that enable for things to happen. And so, Steve Money, where are you? Steve, please, no, stand up. Obviously, we all know who you are, but Steve is the Deputy Director of the Office of Academic Exchange Programs, Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. That's his title. What he does is he makes things happen. It's 1-800-STEVE-MONEY. You ask him, and Steve makes things happen. And Steve, this doesn't happen 6 years ago without you. And when they said you have been selected as co-lead scholars, first we questioned that selection, but then we said, okay. But then they said, call this guy named Steve Money, and we wondered, is there a guy named Steve Money? And there is a guy named Steve Money. But Steve, you made this all work from day one. Without your help and co-creating and co-producing this, it simply wouldn't happen, Steve. So thank you very much. Mary Kirk. I saw Mary. Mary.
Oh, Mary.
Mary.
Yeah, Mary.
Yes. Mary is the director of the same office I just rattled off with Steve. That's her title. What she did is she saw a vision, and she enabled this vision to happen. And as all of you know, within organizations, there's the yays and maybe a few nays. There's this is a great idea, or no, we don't want to do that. Mary is our patron saint. So, Mary, thank you for creating that place for us. We very much appreciate it. Okay. There are directors from each of the countries that are involved in here. Would you just please raise your hand? Please do that for us. Thank you. You have other jobs. You run Fulbright. And then here comes this model, which just added work and time and energy, and in some ways, some thought would be competitive to other things you've done, and it's not been that way at all. You were there from the very beginning, making sure that what we did was effective, but giving us the place and the space to do this complementary work, and you never saw it as competition. You enabled us. Thank you for allowing that to happen as well. Done that. There are so many, I know I have a list, I never have a list, but there are others here in this audience, and you know who you are, who simply have been part of this Fulbright family. Ross and I have been honored to be a part of this. I have two more points, so bear with me. One is that word honor gets thrown out all the time. It's an honor to be here, it's an honor to be at this breakfast, it's an honor to speak to you today, it's an honor. It's meant with all heart, but it's a word. This really has been an honor to work with these group of scholars, to work with Ross, and to look at the impact that has happened from the first Fulbright and the impact that's happening right now. But perhaps more importantly, it's been a privilege for both of us in our careers to not only be a part of this, but to be entrusted in bringing together an incredible group of scholars focused on an incredible region that has incredible potential and is experiencing incredible churn and challenge right now. So it has been a privilege. The last thing I'm going to say, someone said, this is a legacy, and I've said not yet, because legacy to me is excellence over time with impact. So I think it might be a legacy-ish thing happening, but you're all a part of that. You up here, you in the audience. This could very well be a legacy, not because of the Fulbright name, although that's incredibly important, but because of each of you and what you've done, not just to be a Fulbright, but you've all worn a lapel pin, but you really worn it in your hearts. And thank you for helping to create this legacy of Fulbright. And thank you for doing the work you do for the Arctic. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us for many hours, being a wonderful audience, and I would hope that once we go to the reception, that we'll continue this discussion as well. Ross, is there anything else that we forgot to do? You just say the words.
Okay. Well, we've acknowledged Steve, and you've heard some kind words about him that he's earned, and he carries Fulbright in his heart everywhere. And he's still floating from the game last night. So we thought it would be a sort of a fitting way to cap off round 2 here, would be to have Steve say a few words about Fulbright and the program, and to close this and send us to the reception for more relationship and fellowship and good exchange. So welcome to the podium, Steve.
Well, thank you. I feel like I don't really need to speak because you guys just wrapped it up so well. But it really is a pleasure to close this afternoon. As Mike and Ross said, I'm Steve Money, and I'm privileged to work at the State Department, where I'm the Deputy Director of the Global Fulbright Program. Fulbright is now 73 years old, and it has, I think, a tremendous legacy of academic achievement and international collaboration, providing, as it has, opportunities to over 390,000 participants from 160 countries to study, teach, conduct research, exchange ideas, and contribute to finding solutions to shared international concerns. Even though it's that old, 73 years, the Fulbright program every day continues to strive to be dynamic and relevant to the lives of individuals, communities, and countries, and to respond to global challenges such as the real and immediate changes happening in the Arctic and the impacts that those changes are having on the environment, on communities, and economies. And it was really that urgent need that prompted us to establish the Fulbright Arctic Initiative back in 2015 during the U.S. chairmanship of the Arctic Council, and to renew it again in 2018 to support a second cohort of Fulbright Arctic scholars, the network of talented and dedicated researchers that you heard from today. You've heard a lot about the Fulbright program, and I think you've captured that this is a unique kind of Fulbright program intended to allow a diverse group of scholars from around the Arctic to break out of the traditional boundaries of their scientific disciplines, to collaborate closely with each other and present new and innovative solutions, actionable solutions to key policy questions. And the Fulbright scholars here today have really embodied the best of the Fulbright ideal over the past 18 months of their program, and they deserve our respect and our thanks. So thank you very much. Their research and recommendations on how policymakers and scientists can work together in the future, I think, is a vital step in the global effort to work together for a sustainable Arctic. We hope that others, of course, will follow in their footsteps, and that's why we're so pleased to be planning a launch of a third round of the Fulbright Arctic Initiative in 2020, so stay tuned for information on that. But to make that next round a success, we need all of your support, the support of the scholars in this cohort and the one that preceded them, but also support of a lot of others. First of all, we couldn't have done this without the partnership and support of the other Arctic countries. And Mike and Ross pointed out the Fulbright Commission directors and program directors from around the Arctic who are here with us today. We hope that our collaboration on this program will strengthen our partnership with our fellow Arctic countries, but also with Arctic communities, with the wide network of institutions and stakeholders around the world that we've worked with to make this program a success. And I want to thank one of those partners, the Woodrow Wilson Center, for hosting us today and for all of their support. I want to express deep appreciation on behalf of the Fulbright Program to two incredible scholars who have jointly led both the first and second rounds of the Fulbright Arctic Initiative, Dr. Mike Sfraga and Dr. Ross Virginia. Thank you. And lastly, just one more thank you to the Fulbright Arctic Scholars for all the work that you do. We hope this will just be the start of your collaboration as a network of committed scholars and researchers helping all of us shape the future of the Arctic. So thank you. And with that, we'll close.
Thank you, Steve.